All right, welcome into another episode of Buzz Beat. This is Brian here. I'll be joined by Lee, Richie Randall producing. Then we're doing a little quick post-game recap of the Hornets' second game of the season, which was a loss at the hands of Eastern Conference foe, the Detroit Pistons, 111 Detroit to 99 for the Charlotte Hornets. This was not a great game, a very physical game, and really tough sledding for the Hornets in terms of half-court offense, or really just offense in general. Lots of fouls, lots of guys in foul trouble. But before we sort of unpack and debrief this game, Lee, how's it going, man? How are you doing?
Whew, I'm good, BG. It's good to be back on a real season post-game pod. Hopefully we'll be bringing these more times than not this season. But yeah, man, frustrating game to watch. It was one of those games where I felt like every minute or so I was like pulling my hair out or rolling my eyes or like sighing, like it was just they obviously Hornets got in a hole early and were just clawing all night. Got as close as I think 4, and Rozier had an open 3 to try to cut it to 1 at one point. There were just so many plays where it seemed like the ball bounced correctly for Detroit, or Charlotte missed a easy one, and then Detroit 4-point swings here and there, and man, it was just like just wanted to literally like gouge my eyeballs out multiple times.
Yeah, as Regulator said in the chat here, we appreciate anyone who's joining in live. But yeah, I felt like he had bruises from watching that basketball game. It ended early for PJ Washington. He was ejected with a flagrant 2 foul on Isaiah Stewart with about 30 seconds or so left in that game. If you were watching that contest, you could see that brewing the entire game. Jalen Duren, Isaiah Stewart, the Detroit starting front court. They're a very physical and athletic front court duo for the Pistons. They got Charlotte's centers, Mark Williams, Nick Richards, in foul trouble. Richards played just 16 minutes tonight. Mark Williams under 21 minutes. So we saw a decent amount of either JT Thor or PJ Washington at the 5, which something Steve Clifford does not like to do for extended stretches, especially against like a front court with as much sort of like muscle as the Pistons have. And certainly while Marvin Bagley doesn't quite have the same bulk as those two guys, his length, his sort of craftiness, he got at least a couple of fouls on Mark Williams in the first half by just going into him. He got, I think, another one on Richards in the second half.
Yeah, he was a thorn all night, honestly.
Yeah, I mean,
he's little floater push shots and his like navigation in the lane around the rim. He's just he's a wily guy, which is funny to think that Marvin Bagley has become this like wily veteran.
Yeah, it happened quickly. But it does seem like maybe he's sort of morphing into that role. He's always been an incredible offensive rebounder and a very quick like second leaper. And so yeah, if he's got a little bit of like face up, inside a 15-foot craft, that could make him kind of a useful piece. Just right from the jump, this was my first time. I think at some point in preseason, I wanted to catch some of the Pistons and really did not see much of any of them prior to this game. I did watch a bunch of Cade Cunningham's possessions from their season opening loss to Miami when they almost came back on the road. And he put up big numbers in the first game of the season. I thought, kind of going back and watching his performance, it was like pretty good, not like earth-shattering. Cunningham tonight, 12 points on 14 shot attempts. But I thought
he looks healthy though, right? Like I think that if you're a Detroit fan, that's the main takeaway. Is like, obviously he's never been super explosive, but like he looks like he's moving, unhindered.
Yeah, right. And he's still making plays out of the pick and roll. He's still hitting like relocation threes. He's showing, I think, some good pace and deceleration when he gets into those little middle live ball pockets of space, working in the pick and roll. So I thought Cunningham and Jalen Duren showed maybe not a lot, but showed some good flashes of chemistry in the pick and roll tonight. And I would just say the point I was trying to get to with the Pistons though is I've not seen much of them, so I really hadn't seen, what Monty Williams has been installing for them offensively. That was sort of what I was going to have my eye mostly on. There's a lot of like awesome, talented young players on this roster that I really really like. But the thing that sort of just like jumped off the screen watching this tonight, Lee, I don't know if it was just me sort of seeing this, or also certainly Eric and Dell commented it on the broadcast, but their perimeter defenders, Cade Cunningham, Asar Thompson, Jaden Ivey when he got in the game, Killian Hayes, the four young guys especially, like very physical, not letting guys come off screens cleanly, whether it was on ball or off the ball, very physical, sort of like in face defense, clutching, grabbing. There was one point where Jaden Ivey just literally elbow shift LaMelo in the midsection when LaMelo was trying to drive around.
Rather than kind of let him scoot by him, he just decided to knock him on the ground. And like I think you were mentioning this off the air, it was frustrating that the refs never tried to kind of rein in some of their perimeter physicality. But at the same time, if the refs are not going to rein that in, you can't blame Detroit for, pushing the envelope on it. Like they're just doing what's being allowed. And I think that is, and I agree, like I didn't get to see Detroit much at all in the preseason either. I think it's a credit to kind of like the system or culture, whatever you want to call it, that Monty Williams is trying to put in place in his first year there. And like going from coaching a, veteran laden contender to, maybe the one of, if not the youngest team in the NBA. So, Ivy did a really nice job on the ball at times against LaMelo. We can get to LaMelo at some point, of course, but yeah, I mean, Detroit seems to at least, fancy that they have some sort of identity as this kind of like true traditional big bruising offensive rebounding physical defensive team. So give them credit early in the season for, trying to kind of stake a claim as who they are, even if, it's not going to necessarily lead to a ton of wins.
I think there's something here like long-term for them. I do believe that. I believe in Cade Cunningham. I really like Asar Thompson. I know Ivy's coming off the bench to start the season as Detroit still kind of is maybe figuring out what it has with Killian Hayes in his development and his role. I thought like the on-ball defense was pretty good, and also just like you could see his explosion as a driver on multiple times. He had a transition finish in the second half too, where he sort of like squeezed in between two guys on the break. Just I don't know, like his burst, the flexibility, whatever, all the goods he has as a downhill driver to like get into tough spaces, tight spaces. Very, very impressive. Like I continue to be pretty bullish on Jaden Ivey long term, and I'm willing to bet on his speed. But yeah, why don't we start here and start with LaMelo Ball? It's a tough game for him.
Tough start to the season, really.
It's been a tough start to the season. He had 20 points tonight, but on 23 true field goal attempts, 2 of 10 from the land of twos, and 2 of 7 on threes, so 4 of 17 overall from the field. A couple sort of like, I think maybe slightly more encouraging numbers, 12 of 10 from the free throw line. And again, you saw the amount of like shots that he took at the rim in this game. 8 field goal attempts at the rim. He only made 2 of them. Thought maybe he could have gotten a couple of calls on a few of them as well. Thought he was also maybe a little out of control on some of them for that matter as well. The average 2-point field goal shot distance for LaMelo in this game, 2.5 feet from the rim. So again, like, if you were only looking at some of these numbers and you saw the field goal attempts, you saw the rim attempts, you might feel like kind of encouraged knowing that he was driving and going at, what is young, but a pretty like wide and imposing front line with Duren and Stewart. But obviously like the efficiency wasn't there. And Charlotte also played some of its best basketball. There wasn't much to choose from, but when he was sort of sitting and Rozier scored 8 points in the span of 90 seconds, Detroit calls a timeout. Brandon Miller gets subbed out. LaMelo goes in, and whatever sort of like run the Hornets had goes away. I thought there were a couple of tough whistles for the Hornets down the stretch that didn't help matters either. But Lee, just sort of thoughts on LaMelo tonight, and maybe to start the season. I don't know, like where are you with him as far as the first? It's just 2 games.
Yeah, I
But
mean,
how have you felt?
yeah, I mean, I'm certainly not. I don't think I have any like massive like macro concerns about LaMelo, other than some of the things we've talked about a ton of different times in this podcast of where he still needs to improve as a young player. I will say though, like a couple small things. Oh, well, first of all, the caveat of, and I think Eric Collins made this point on the broadcast is, LaMelo had a very like rehab intensive summer. So it wasn't necessarily a normal like no holds bar train all off season summer for LaMelo. So I do think we need to let him get probably like 10 to 12 games into this season before we really start making any dramatic conclusions about where his development is. But one thing, love that he's like getting to the rim. I do think there are a lot of and look, don't get me wrong, he did get a tough whistle tonight at times, and I know some Hornets fans have mentioned that in our chat, and I certainly saw it on Twitter. Like, I'm not here to say he didn't get a tough whistle at times, but LaMelo has to kind of default to being determined to finish through contact versus seeking a foul call. So, like, that's just like a little bit of a, I think, switch he needs to flip in his brain. Like, let the foul call be the gravy on top and just like absolutely be determined to finish layups regardless of the defense fouling you or not, and then have it be an and one, or and he's still gaining that respect from referees so to get those calls around the rim. And it was a tough whistle for Charlotte on the whole tonight at times. I mean, you mentioned all 3 bigs being in foul trouble all game. It was a rough whistle tonight, but it's not the reason why they lost, at least in my opinion. I mean, the Hornets couldn't get stops when they needed to. They got in an early hole. LaMelo, was what? I mean, he was rough, 4 for 17 from the field that you laid out. So, and then the other thing with LaMelo is there were still a couple, defensive breakdowns, early help off a guy that sends the Hornets defense into rotations and open 3-pointers from Alec Burks and a couple others. A couple kind of like Matador blow-bys at times. I remember one from Jaden Ivey on the left wing in the first half where he went in for a really athletic finish. So certainly room to nitpick LaMelo's early season performance so far. But I'm not going to make any sweeping declarations. That's for sure.
Yeah. I mean, it's a tough start, and you made the right point, which is that, Steve Clifford brought it up before the game, and Eric Collins mentioned it, and Dell talked about it during the broadcast. LaMelo did not have a normal offseason, rehabbing from ankle surgery, and so he needs a little bit more time to sort of ramp up, and let's see where we are by like mid to end of November. I thought he played well at times in the preseason, but the first 2 games it has been rough, but I think he deserves, a little bit more build up. It is a little disappointing to have not seen a little bit more growth with him as like a half court pick and roll guy, just given like where he was as a rookie. I do think it's notable. I think it's worth mentioning that like where he was as a rookie was in a backcourt that had a bunch of ball handlers, easy to forget about. No, not for us maybe, but for maybe people outside of the people who follow and cover the Hornets or are fans, but like Malik Monk, Devontae Graham, it's a much different like backcourt hierarchy, and it has been for a few years now. So there's a lot more on his plate, and we just don't know right now where his sort of floor quite isn't like the right word, but like in terms of like stability, where he is as like where his like baseline is as like a half court operator. The way this guy beat people before he got to the NBA, as someone that's not super duper quick or bursty and obviously like, was even skinnier when he was showing up back in the States after spending a year playing in the NBL, was his flexibility and his deception. And right now that isn't enough. And I do think even his rookie year, he just flashed a little bit more stuff in terms of like his movement, his footwork, synced with his handle as a means to like getting guys, rocking them off balance and then turning the corner on them. But right now,
I think he's fallen in love with his dribble a little bit. Like he was like a get it up the floor. I mean, how many times did he hit like rim runners, early in his Charlotte tenure, and you haven't seen that quite as much. I mean, he did have a great drop off to Mark Williams in traffic when Williams had an awesome kind of two-handed slam finish. But I think just like and to your point, he has more playmaking responsibility than he did early in his Charlotte career too. So I think if they can get it out of his hands a little bit earlier, that would be productive.
Yeah, you could always get it out of his hands and then get him back on ball. Like he does move without it. Like he does relocate. Even he had a kick out to I think it was Brandon Miller on like a pick and pop like design 3 where even after he passed it to Miller, you could see him like immediately darting back across the lane and out above the break. Like he does move without the ball. So I don't know. They could maybe be like a little bit more judicious about that. There's some stuff that they run to do that. I don't think it's super duper effective. Maybe they could look for it when they just kind of get into their flow a little bit more. But, right now it's just tough because you could see him try to turn the aggression up and try to get downhill tonight. And if he gets a few more whistles, it changes the calculus. All of a sudden, you take away a couple of those missed shots, they turn into free throws. He's going to make those 80 whatever percent of the time. Like he's a great free throw shooter. So I commend the aggression and his ability to sort of like play through contact. But to your point a second ago, Lee, like it did kind of feel like he was going in there like to try to get a whistle, which doesn't have to be like inherently bad, but it's not like you're expecting him to just like constantly finish over the top of guys like Duren and Stewart. And that's part of the issue too. When he sees drop coverage, that continues to be like a concern because while he at times will show the ability to like snake back, get a guy on his hip, and then use that to try to like get downhill. And if he does that, that can often, buy the 5-man a little bit more time to try to like get downhill and attack the drop coverage that way. He can get to like pull up, but often you're seeing like just a lot of like pull up threes as teams are ducking under those, as like opponents are ducking under those screens and letting him shoot. Or if the guy gets caught on the screen, he's still just often going to like the mid-range runners and floaters, which like that's always been a part of his game. Like that's always been part of it. But I don't know. I think the hope was always that shot would become like his off-speed pitch, and wouldn't be the thing that his downhill drive game would like need to like consist of, because that can't be the thing that like you're routinely beating drop coverage with. So look, for now, the ball is going to continue to be in his hands a lot. And I just think it's big for Charlotte for two things that we really didn't see tonight. Three things. One, they're going to need to handle pressure better than that, period. Like, you just can't let a roster of 21-year-olds just like get in your grill and like knock you off kilter like that. Secondly, Mark Williams, I think being in foul trouble and not playing well, even when he was sort of like on the court, is an issue for them because like he's their biggest pressure point on the rim right now. Like without a doubt, unquestionably, that's the case. So not having him, he only played 20 and a half minutes, big difference maker. And I think the other thing they need to do, and Spencer and I talked about this a little bit after the season opening win the other night, is that like Charlotte has to move it side to side first and then try to like crack a seam and get downhill. Like, I just don't think it can be, that initial ball screen is just going to be the thing that like answers the call for you. I'd like to see more empty side screens than we saw tonight. Like the LaMelo, Mark Williams empty side pick and roll is good stuff. And like I do think Atlanta did them somewhat of a favor the other night by playing up at the level so often in the pick and roll. And like that just opens up some stuff for Charlotte. The roll, skip passes to the weak side when the low man gets collapses in. And it's gonna be some of those more like drop looks that look a little bit more concerning. All right, Lee, anything else you'd like to add to on LaMelo, or is there another direction you'd like to take this in?
No, let's talk about Brandon Miller, baby. I mean, my goodness. I'm not sure that as 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 his prospect profile was, which was very enticing and tantalizing, and we spent a lot of time talking about Brandon Miller and Scoot Henderson and all the different fantastic prospects in this draft class. For what he was coming out of Alabama and what we've seen so far, obviously just 2 games, incredibly limited sample size, but I'm not sure that he could have had a more promising start, honestly, on this team. I mean, from being like an integral piece of this rotation right away, the shot making that you've seen, Eric Collins made a good point that, at the time, I don't know, he took a few more in the second half, but at the time, Brandon Miller was 4 for 10 from three, about halfway through this game on the season, and 2 of those missed threes were like, end of quarter heaves from 3-quarter court. So he was basically 4 for 8 from three, in his first, 25, 30 minutes of NBA play. And I think one thing that, and you mentioned this on the text thread, the Buzzbeat text thread, BG, like the kid is fearless. He's competitive. He's determined. Like he's got a little shit to him, like in a good way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Obviously he flashes the athleticism, the transition, absolute like thunder slam he had late in the game. And even like some defensive flashes too, I think. I mean, he took Cade at times during this game, so he fits really well, I think, with LaMelo. He's making shots right now, and man, just really just love like his kind of attitude that he plays with on the court. It's a really good balance of competitiveness, but like under control competitiveness, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it did feel like Stewart and Jalen Duren were trying to like lure him into something extra this game. And like he definitely like wasn't backing down from them, but there were multiple times he just would sort of go like catatonic almost, and just sort of like stare, kind of like stare by them while they were like kind of getting in his face or like going chest to chest with him. It was interesting. Yeah, I think they've asked him to do like not too much offensively to start the season. Like it's really been, Spencer and I talked about this after the opener. Like so far, like they're giving him there's some pick and roll looks that they'll give to him, like real quick hitters with like, like almost like a, 2 progression read, like the center on the dive and then like a weak side kick out, and if it's not there, just like, flip it back to LaMelo. They've put LaMelo and Brandon Miller into pistol action again tonight. I'd like to see even a little bit more of that. Like
Yeah.
you can sync those guys together, the better. Like because long term, if those guys are in Charlotte and you're building like a winner up around them, that remains to be seen. But that'll be a big part of it. They're finding ways to get him coming off of like wide pin down action. Like all of that's like pretty good stuff. I don't think he's like feasted off of any of it yet. I think he's been kind of at his best offensively, like when things have been scrambled. He had 3 finishes at the rim tonight. They were all assisted, right? And there were 2 of them were in transition. One was the lob from LaMelo after Miller started the transition sequence by like getting a steal, then sprinting the floor. LaMelo lobs it to him. The next one was another like corner cut, and he scored 3 times cutting out of the right corner this season.
Yeah.
The rim this year, he scored 2 in the opener, 1 tonight, and then obviously after the Richards block, which started another fast break sequence, PJ dribbles up, hits Miller, and then Miller dunks without Isaiah Stewart even trying to contest the shot at the rim. So, like, playing hard without the basketball, running without the basketball, using defense to open up transition offense, that kind of like two-way sequency complementary basketball, all very, very good stuff. So yeah, very encouraged with what I've seen so far from him. Really, I think Summer League was like not great, and that coming on the heels of a lot of like I'm not sure what like whether it's frustration or uncertainty around what the team should have done with the pick. Like, look, I remain steadfast in who I think they should have selected with that pick. Like long term, I still like Scoot Henderson, but as the better prospect. But like Miller has played great basketball so far, and like I really think in preseason he played well, even though he didn't shoot it well. Wasn't worried about it, and he's come out of the gate. And as you said, like in the role that they're asking him to play right now, I think is like playing very well in that role. The key will be to see like when they like the training wheels start to come off a little bit, like what does that look like? Is that just sort of like giving him the ball more and allowing him to create? I don't think it will be that, but maybe. Or is that more playing time and just stuff coming within the flow? Or is that more playing time and then Charlotte, Steve Clifford saying, all right, we got to find more ways to get this guy the ball. Like we need to have 15 calls tonight that are going to be set up to put Brandon in a position to either like shoot it off a handoff or a pin down, or if they're putting two on the ball, then let's let him use his size to make a play. But like that's exciting stuff to consider. And this is something that Darian from Trust the Buzz, he and I talked about the other week when he came on with us. Like Miller, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts about this. Just like his scalability, he's so malleable because he can shoot off movement, because he moves without the ball. And he can handle and make some passing reads and pick and roll. Like where he sort of like how good he is at that, I think is like sort of like up for debate at the moment. But yeah, how would you, let's just say 6 weeks from now, it's the middle of December, not quite the dog days of the season, but just, Miller at this point is probably maybe hitting like an early rookie wall or whatever. How would you like to see his usage go if he's playing well, but you're trying to find like a larger role for him going forward?
Yeah, it's interesting to think about. I mean, I do think that he is showing a little bit more kind of like off-ball offensive intelligence than I may have gave him credit for in the draft process. Like, and he's also showing a little bit more kind of like overall basketball awareness too. Like, for example, Hayward had it going in that third quarter, right? And Brandon Miller had the ball in the open floor in transition and recognized that Hayward was trailing him. And like you would see a lot of rookies just kind of like blinders on, head down, attack the rim right there. And not that that would have necessarily been a terrible decision, but Brandon Miller processed like in a millisecond. Gordon Hayward's hot. He's trailing me. He's going to have a wide open three and just pitched it right back to him. And you could actually see from the reaction from Gordon that he was like super pumped that Brandon like noticed that.
Yep.
So that's like a really, it's like a small thing, but it's like a pretty good sign for a young player in the heat of a really competitive game to like process all of that in the open floor and transition and make the right decision like that. So I've just seen some little kind of nuggets from him that I am really encouraged on. I also think he's still like, and to back to your original question, like he's very much still, you can see him, the wheels almost spinning for him to be like, where do I fit in? Where do I pick my spots? When can I be a little bit more aggressive? And he's got some off the dribble stuff. I mean, he particularly has like a pretty nice left to right crossover that he flashes from time to time. So I think he'll get more aggressive. I hope that, like you said, Clifford will start to scheme up a little bit more for him with the movement shooting in particular, because at his height, I mean, doesn't need much space and he's got a beautiful release. So yeah, and look, on the other hand, there's gonna be there's going to be a week where he shoots like 1 for 11 or 1 for 12. Like that is coming. Just
absolutely going to
like
happen. Yeah.
be ready for that.
Yeah.
And it's okay.
Yeah.
That's what happens with, particularly with young shooters. So, let's not judge him. Let's not judge him high or low too much on the shooting right now. Let's watch the off-ball cutting. Let's watch the competitiveness. Let's watch the offensive and defensive instincts. And that'll be more telling even necessarily than the shooting numbers in his first year, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, he's going to have, because he's pretty jumper dependent, he's going to have weeks like that.
Totally.
Like it is. And I mean, no one, even some of the best players in the world, like no one's even like immune to that. And like he's going to have, there are going to be some nights that don't look, where it doesn't look pretty. But his ability to, if he can start to knock some of those shots down consistently, it's going to just open up other stuff. Like that's the stuff that I think with him. I mean, maybe everyone has their preference, but I think the thing that I'm sort of like most excited to see at some point is like the movement playmaking. Like if he does become a guy that starts to like create a little bit of gravity coming off screens and handoffs, then when teams put 2 on the ball, like if and when that happens, if it's Mark Williams or Richard setting a screen, like those guys diving or PJ popping or, Hayward trying to like slip into a pocket of space, just like the stuff that you can do in those situations with him at that height, and that vision is pretty interesting. So, yeah, he's been great. He's also, this was the second night in the row. The rotation so far has been start LaMelo, Terry Rozier, Gordon Hayward, PJ, Mark Williams, and then at the 6-minute mark of the first quarter, they bring LaMelo off 2 nights in a row, or not 2 games in a row, and Miller's been the first sub, and so he gets to come in and play with the starters, and then they bring LaMelo back in, and he was playing with 4 bench guys with 2-3 minutes left to go in the first quarter tonight. I would have to double check the numbers. My guess is those lineups have probably not gone great for the Hornets so far this season. Just looking through a couple of comments here. There's been a few people chiming in. Let's see, look around. Noah Clark says y'all were too hard on him during the pre-draft process, talking about Miller. I know you like Scoop, but this was the right decision, at least so far. Like that might be true. Like again, I stand by my evaluation of both those guys, and I was not like out on Miller as a prospect. But I did
we won't know for 3 years,
right. That's exactly
the real reality of it.
And like just to like peel, like just to like let everyone into the process. Like if I'm wrong, that's great. Like
yeah,
like that's really like if that's wrong, if I'm wrong, then that's like a great thing for the Hornets. And I want both those guys to do well, like Scoot and Brandon Miller. So I'm pulling for them. And again, if I'm wrong, then that's like, I'll have to sort of, something to file away for the way I like scout prospects. And again, would be a good thing for Charlotte. We probably were pretty tough on him. I thought my criticism of him was fair, but yeah, part of it was I just really, really liked Scoot. I think that was part of it too. Regulator says Miller just looks like he belongs on the court. It's true. Yep. Matt Strand says Miller is currently the only real scoring threat off the bench.
Also
Mason also true. Yeah, Mason McGowan says I think he's talking about Miller here. He says if he can develop a solid handle for self-creation, he could be a Tatum-esque player. That would include the issues finishing at the rim too. So, but yes, I think there's something to be said for that. That is like, a best case scenario, right? In terms of like, I think outcomes for Miller, right? So maybe not impossible.
Just to the no scoring off the bench comment. I mean, it's very true right now. And part of it is because, no Cody Martin, no Miles Bridges, and to a much lesser degree, but Bryce McGowan's was injured and is healthy now. So maybe maybe McGowan's gives you a little bit more playmaking juice off the bench. It'll be interesting to see if Clifford elects to keep going with Maladone or if he tries McGowan's here or there. I mean, this is very much Hornets in the weed stuff, but that's who
Yeah.
our listeners are. So
Yeah. Well, and I would say too, seeing Mason McGowan's name pop up does remind me Bryce McGowan, who missed game one, was available to play tonight. If so, and also if this was mentioned at some point in the offseason, like before the season, I was not aware that he had worked out with Gordon Hayward this offseason, like
yeah, that's
5:30
cool.
a.m. workouts. I thought that was kind of cool. So I'm excited to see some Bryce McGowans. I hope he's able to get on the court for them soon. Ghost Jay in the comments brings up the fact that you guys keep bringing up Scoot. We have Miller. Is the issue support our players and move on from Scoot talk? Like, you're probably right. Honestly, like at some point, and I promise, like, not just to the listeners here, but like to my co-host, at some point I will hopefully mellow out on some of the sort of like Scoot and Brandon Miller comparisons, but for right now, it's still just pretty fresh. Like the draft was 4 months ago, but I will try to make a point of like dialing it back. Though I do think those guys are going to be, I think they're going to be compared to one another for a long time. But like I am definitely like polling for Brandon Miller to be like an all-star player for the Hornets. Like I promise you that. I'd much rather, I'd rather be wrong about the, my evaluation. You know what I mean? So, anyways, last thing here I do want to touch on because we need to wrap this up. Was just the Hornets defense tonight against, not obviously not a very good Detroit offense, but they allow just 0.86 points per possession in terms of Detroit's half-court offensive efficiency. It's not bad. It was the offensive rebounds and putbacks that really did them in. Detroit with a 32% offensive rebound rate in this game. They scored a decent amount on second chance opportunities. I think Williams, just last thing I'll throw this out there, I think they like Williams being in foul trouble. He was not able to sort of like pack his usual punch playing drop coverage. I thought at times before the foul trouble came on, he was like doing nice stuff at the rim. He blocked a couple of shots and was doing a nice job sort of just closing down the paint. I thought it was interesting at times, both when Charlotte was having to play with Thor and PJ at the 4-5, and then even later in the second half when they were trying to like speed up Detroit a little bit, where they were, if not like outright, blitzing, they were like, putting two on the ball and like trying to sort of like heat up Cade Cunningham a little bit. And I thought that was an interesting move to do against Detroit. They don't really have a ton of shooting on the backside to like stretch you out and really like make you have to cover a ton of ground. But in those situations, Charlotte then becomes really, really small. And those backside defensive rotations, if it's Richards or Williams that are the ones that are trying to like, trap or blitz Cade 25 feet from the hoop, and then all of a sudden PJ is your only source of length on the backside. And I do think the Pistons were able to sort of like in those situations just like play murder ball and either like get a shot up and then try to get on the glass or just like get it to Stewart or Duran or Bagley in the paint and let those guys just like play over the top a little bit. So it was interesting. I mean, that sort of felt like it was more necessity for them. But it was something Charlotte had to do tonight defensively that was different. They threw some different looks at Trae Young in against Atlanta the other opening night, but it was not nearly they mixed it up more tonight. And again, I think that was sort of out of necessity, but just a thing that caught my eye during this game. All right, Lee, I think it is about time for us to wrap up. Do you have anything else you'd like to add here?
Hey, an impressive win on opening night versus Atlanta and a disappointing, frustrating loss in game 2 at home against Detroit. Hornets basketball is back, baby. Let's go.
It really is. And Noah Clark asking issues about William. Do we have any concerns with Mark dealing with physicality? Like going back to his time at Duke, he does need to get stronger in his lower body. Like Mark does get, stronger guys with lower bodies can like muscle him a little bit. So but that's something we knew about. And like, I think he will get stronger. He certainly has the frame to add more muscle, but he's always going to like, part of his deal is like, he's sort of like an above the rim center, but yeah, I do think it's something to monitor. I'm not like overly concerned about it. Really appreciate y'all for chiming in, listening into the comments. I know this was not a super fun game to watch, nor maybe one to debrief. But happy, Lee, to talk with some hoops with you after the game here. And again, thank you to anyone else who chimed in. Please, if you haven't done this already, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your pods, leave us a review. We really appreciate those. Subscribe to BuzzBeat Plus if you'd like to get access to premium content, or if you'd like to get podcasts a day early. Don't forget, Richie had a conversation with Gordon Hayward last week. We've got the audio of that tacked on to our last episode, and also like a write-up for that in the also on the site as well. So go check that out if you haven't already. But let's go ahead and close up shop here tonight. Good talking ball with you guys. Hornets will be back in action on Monday at home again. This time they will be taking on the Brooklyn Nets, which is going to be tough. That's a really good, talented defensive team that's going to give the Hornets issues. So excited to tune in, but I could see that being an ugly game as well. That said, until next time,